Apple introduced ProRAW just a couple of years ago. It's a feature built specifically for its Pro line of iPhones and combines the benefits of traditional RAW photography with computational photography, so users can still take advantage of features like deep fusion and night mode while still having the ability to adjust sharpening, white balance, and tone mapping. That's at least the basic idea behind ProRAW. But how good is it really? Should we just ditch RAW files and just exclusively shoot with ProRAW? Let's find out. To measure ProRAW's capabilities, we're going to do 3 different tests. We'll shoot a high dynamic range environment, a regular simple snapshot in full daylight, and finally an environment that will trigger Apple's night mode. With these very different scenarios, we'll be able to gauge how good ProRAW actually is. So let's start with our first test. This is one of the advertised benefits of using ProRAW. The format has a bigger dynamic range compared to regular RAW, but the technique with which that's achieved is nothing special. ProRAW just combines different exposures into one image. Photographers have been doing that for ages now. The phone I'll be using to take the pictures is going to be the iPhone 14 Pro, so it's Apple's latest and greatest, at least for a couple more months. So let's first see our test environment. This photo is taken with the GH5. I used it as a baseline just to showcase the type of result one should expect. It's a bracketed image, and it's the only way I could get everything correctly exposed. This type of environment is demanding for pretty much any camera out there, not just the iPhone or the GH5. If we expose for the interior, all the exterior parts will be blown out. And if we expose for the exterior, then all the interior elements will be dark. We can recover some details with just one image, but it's not going to be a clean result. So the only way to shoot this is through bracketing. Now let's load up the ProRAW image we got with the iPhone 14 Pro. Even in the zoomed out view, the result doesn't look good. You might not be able to tell through YouTube's compression, but once I zoom in, it's going to be clear what's going on. As you can see, all the details are completely wiped away. The floor has no detail whatsoever, and everything is a blurry mess. The same goes for the books. The titles are completely smeared out. We can only see the author and some of them because the letters in these ones are huge, so they managed to survive the aggressive noise reduction. Let me bring up the GH5 image side by side just so it's easier to evaluate how bad the ProRAW result is. It's pretty obvious already, but let's quickly refresh our memory. Just as a reminder, the GH5 image is 21 megapixels in size, and the iPhone 14 Pro is 48 megapixels. But as I've been saying in other videos, megapixels don't really mean much. We can have an image with insane resolution that just looks like crap. The example I always give is what you get when scanning a photocopy of a photo. You can scan it at 600 or 1200 dpi, and you will get really high pixel counts. But the actual detail that is there is just what a photocopier managed to resolve. And that is very much the case with a ProRAW image. We have a high resolution image that just has no detail at all. Where the floor on the ProRAW image looks like a blurry mess, the floor on the GH5 RAW is nice and detailed. And if we move to the book titles, you can see that we can easily read all of them. All the details are there. The noise reduction on the ProRAW image is so extreme that any detail is completely gone. Let's take as an example these statues on the right side of the image. Aside from the features of the statues getting completely erased, notice that there are no numbers on the base of the statues. The numbers are completely wiped out. And the same goes for the baskets next to the books. The ProRAW file makes them look like they're made out of some sort of fabric. It's a very smooth result. But if we check the GH5 RAW image, you will see how the basket actually looks like. It's a more rough type of material. And the same goes for the wall. On the ProRAW, it looks like it's a smooth surface, but it's actually more bumpy. Just to give you an idea of how aggressive the noise reduction is, I'll adjust the GH5 RAW image to try and match the ProRAW result. As you can see, I have to turn the luminance value all the way to the max. This is the type of noise reduction going on in the ProRAW image. And since this is a result of a stack of noise-reduced images, there's no sliders to adjust the level of noise reduction. That's the best the image can look, which is not that good. And just to show you how bad this 48 megapixel ProRAW image is, here's a bracketed RAW image coming out of the exact same iPhone. I shot 5 RAW images with different exposures and just combined them all in Photoshop. It's a process that takes a couple of seconds, and you can even do it without a tripod. That's how I actually shot the GH5 image. As you can see, we not only have the dynamic range of the ProRAW image, but most importantly, we managed to capture the actual details of the image. We can see the patterns of the floor, we can see the titles of the books, the numbers on the statues, and the actual surface of the wall. The result is not even close, it's night and day. And just as a reminder, the bracketed RAW image is 12 megapixels compared to the 48 megapixel ProRAW. So yeah, does ProRAW have a pretty big dynamic range? Sure, but the result is absolutely atrocious when we try to shoot a high dynamic range environment. So whatever benefit we might have by shooting ProRAW is completely outweighed by the lack of detail in the final image. We're just better off taking a bracketed RAW image. Now, let's test the less extreme scenario. In this photo, there's nothing too demanding. We have plenty of light coming in, the subject is close to the camera, so there are no intricate details, and there's no extreme dynamic range going on. In this case, it looks like ProRAW works absolutely fine. And if I bring in the RAW equivalent image, you will notice that they almost look the same. The ProRAW has the added benefit of being a 48 megapixel image, so it's going to be easier to print this in bigger sizes. But as you can see, resolution aside, there's no real difference in detail. If I zoom in to 200% and leave the 48 megapixel image to 100%, they kinda look the same. There's a tiny bit more detail in the 48 megapixel image, but it's really negligible. The one thing that looks weird on the ProRAW image is what happens in the edges of the frame. The text looks like it has a little bit more ghosting. The RAW image has some of this ghosting too, but it's not at this level. The letters in the edges of the frame look slightly cleaner on the 12 megapixel RAW. Overall though, the ProRAW image looks absolutely fine in this scenario, and since it has a bigger resolution, it has a slight advantage. I decided to shoot some more images just to make sure that I'm not missing any of the benefits of ProRAW, but the results didn't change. Let's take as an example this image. Both the RAW and ProRAW look the same. The ProRAW image has this yellow tint, but we can fix that pretty easily. We can edit both of these images very aggressively and they will both look fine. The only benefit of the ProRAW image is once more the bigger resolution. Again, it doesn't look like there's more detail resolved, it's just that we can print the image in bigger sizes. That's about it. Of course, that's a plus, but knowing how unpredictable ProRAW is with its baked-in computational photography, I don't know if I would risk taking an image using ProRAW. I would probably stick with RAW, where I can fine-tune absolutely everything, focusing, exposure, etc. With ProRAW, we have no control over these things. Just as a comparison, here's the 21 megapixel GH5 image next to the 48 megapixel ProRAW. Because I can control the f-stop on the GH5, I get a much cleaner and sharper result. A lot of the areas on the ProRAW image are very blurry because the iPhone prioritizes low f-stops. But with RAW, we can control those things on the iPhone too. Which is another advantage RAW shooting has over ProRAW. So, To summarize, I would say that when it comes to non-demanding scenarios, shooting with ProRAW has a slight advantage due to the bigger resolution we get out of the iPhone, but we have to give up any manual settings we might want to use, which might lead to a worse image overall. And of course, identifying whether a certain scenario is demanding or not can be a challenge on its own. In this mode, we hit again the same issue, the lack of manual controls. In the previous example, we couldn't control the f-stop, but in this case we want to adjust the ISO value and the shutter speed. But we have to rely on the iPhone making these decisions. As a result, the images have the same look as the ones with the high dynamic range. Every single thing in the image is smeared out due to the aggressive noise reduction. Let me show you what I mean. Here's the ProRAW image. Even in the zoomed out version, we can already tell that things are not quite right. But it's when we zoom in that things get even clearer. Notice all the parts of the floor that are covered in shadows. These have every little bit of detail taken out completely. They almost look like they're made out of a flat color. The illustration is also smeared out, but due to the look of it, it doesn't stand out so much. But when we compare it with a regular RAW image, the difference will be quite visible. The text also suffers from the same issue. Some parts are smeared out while others are clearer, but even the ones that look better have their outlines mangled due to the heavy noise reduction. The image can look a lot better. And just to prove that, let's switch to the raw image taken with the exact same iPhone. Because we can control every single setting, we can lower the ISO value and adjust the shutter speed accordingly. That gives us a much cleaner image. So once more, the 12 megapixel raw image delivers a better overall photo than the 48 megapixel ProRAW. As you can see, all the details of the floor are there, and we can even get a better view of the paper quality the illustration is printed on. Every little part of the image is cleaner and sharper. If we use the exact same ISO settings as the ProRAW image, the RAW file will be noisier than the ProRAW, but that's the whole point of having manual settings. We can adjust things to get the best result possible, so we don't have to compromise on detail or colors, which is another thing that happens with noise reduction. If we start adjusting the color noise, we will get more muted colors. As you can see, shooting in ProRAW in most cases doesn't really get us a better image. In low light and in high dynamic range situations, we can get a better image shooting RAW. And that was the whole point of using ProRAW, that we could take advantage of Apple's extra features like Deep Fusion, Night Mode, and High Dynamic Range. It's only in cases where we don't have any extreme conditions that we can get some better results with ProRAW. And that's not because the photos resolve more detail, but because we can get an image with higher pixel count that can just be printed easier in larger sizes. If Apple allowed us to shoot 48 megapixel ProRAW files without any noise reduction and with manual controls, we might have been able to see some better results than the 12 megapixel RAW files. But as it stands right now, there are very few cases where shooting ProRAW is better than RAW. Personally, I don't use ProRAW at all. I don't see the reason of having to deal with huge file sizes and with images that are actually worse than a simple RAW file. I'm hoping that with hardware and software advancements, ProRAW will be more useful in the future, but as it stands right now, there's no real benefit to it. So yeah, I think that about covers things. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.